One simple way to help us understand the writing prophets is to understand a bit more about the structure of our Bible. Loosely, our Bible is structured chronologically, meaning that if we were to open our Bible and start reading, the order that we read events in is generally the order in which they happened. There are exceptions, but generally it helps to look at it this way. That is, until we get to the prophets. It helps if we break our Old Testament Bible down into major sections. In the Old Testament, we have 5 major sections. They are the first, the books of law. These are the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Next are the books of history. These are the next 12 books, Joshua through Esther. Then come the books of poetry, the next 5 books, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Then our 5 major prophets and our 12 minor prophets. If we read the Old Testament straight through, we would read law, history, poetry, and then prophets. But in the historical or chronological order these take place in, the books of poetry and the writing prophets take place at the same time as the 12 books of history. The events in 2 Kings 15 through 20, for example, are happening at the same time that Isaiah and Micah are writing and prophesying. Bear with me in this. For those of you who have been Christians a long time, this is probably something you clarified years ago. But if you miss this, if you don't understand how the prophets can slide right under the historical books, you'll waste more time than necessary being confused. So, now that we understand the order of our Bible, the next biggest question that seems to pop up for people is understanding the why behind God's anger in the writing prophets. As we all know, it's abundantly clear when we open our Bibles to any of the writing prophets that God is angry. He is fed up, done. But if we don't understand the history of Israel, we might only see what seems to be an unreasonably angry God. The fact is, though, by the time we get into the history books and the time when our prophets are writing, the people have already tested the patience and grace of God. As I shared last week, the entire Bible is one big story about the grace of God, about His desire to reconcile us to Him and to have a relationship with Him. From the very first book of Genesis, just 3 chapters in, we see that we are sinners in need of a Savior, someone who will make us right with God. From the beginning, God has a plan for this. Genesis chapter 12 brings step 1 of His plan into view. As we read about Abram and Sarai and their trust and faith in God, we see that God's grace is abundant long before Jesus comes on the scene. God makes what we would call an unconditional covenant with Abraham in Genesis 12, and later formalizes it in chapter 15. Let's look at Genesis 12, 1 through 3 together. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." God seals this promise in Genesis chapter 15 when He promises a sleeping Abraham that He will indeed fulfill His earlier words. This unconditional covenant is important for Abraham's descendants, who become known as the nation of Israel, but also for us as believers today. We are the ones, the peoples, that God promised would be blessed through Israel, indeed through Jesus, whose ancestor was the one and only Abraham. You might be wondering why I keep emphasizing unconditional covenant. This is important because God's promises are not dependent upon anything Abraham does. I like to think of it the way a parent might. Someone has a baby and assumes responsibility to clothe, feed, care, and love for it. While parents might expect certain behaviors to go along with this responsibility in older children, the same isn't true for newborns. The baby is not required to do anything to get their needs met, although, let's be honest, a smile at a 3 a.m. feeding goes a long way. The promise a parent makes is unconditional. Or another way to think about it would be taking your car to a mechanic because there's something wrong. The mechanic fixes it, but charges you nothing. Not only are you blessed with no bill, you are blessed with a car that will take you to work, errands, road trips, whatever it is that you need. It's both a one-time and ongoing gift. God's unconditional covenant with Abraham was like this as well. A baby Israel would later turn into a great nation that would bless the world. As this great nation of Abraham's descendants grew, we fast forward a bit in our timeline of history. God understood then that he needed to treat Israel less like a baby and more like an adolescent, one that could learn from its mistakes, choose to obey, understand actions and consequences. So as we move into the second book of law, Exodus, we get a different kind of covenant from God. After God rescues his people from slavery, God sits down with Moses and lays out a new covenant for Israel. Let's look at Exodus 19, 5 through 8. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. That very first verse we read, "Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant." Instead of a promise from God that required nothing from the Israelites, this time God asks them to obey him fully. This covenant is conditional. It has strings attached, as you might say. God lays out exactly what those strings look like in the rest of Exodus and Leviticus with the giving of what is called the Mosaic Law. Although it was clear that the people agreed to God's conditions, he reminds them again as the next generation waits to enter the land God promised to Abraham. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, God lays out exactly what will happen to the people. If they obey, there will be blessings beyond their wildest dreams. But if they break their promise, if they are disobedient, there will be curses beyond their comprehension. Understanding Deuteronomy 28 sets up the rest of the Old Testament. It's kind of an important chapter. Everything you read in Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Ezra, the writing prophets, it all comes back to this conditional covenant, the Mosaic covenant, and the blessings and curses of Deuteronomy chapter 28. There was a time in my personal faith journey that the God of the Old Testament seemed just like an angry and distant God, that he withheld his grace to somehow highlight for us how serious he was. I missed the grace of God in the Old Testament because I was too busy looking at the anger. Don't miss it as we travel through this story. God's adolescent people, the Israelites, needed to understand, just like we do today, that he is bigger than anything that can be thrown at us, and that his grace should change us. The Mosaic Law, this conditional covenant, was given to show us just how much Israel and we today need a relationship with the holy, righteous, just, and good Creator God. Unfortunately for Israel, as we will see, they miss this and too quickly forget the grace already extended.